friends. Welcome to episode 1 of Life Without Limca. Today, we'll be talking about the intersection of culture, parenting, and mental health, specifically in the Desi American community. My name is Simran.
My name is Kirat.
My name is Pallavi.
And because this is our first episode, we would love to introduce you to ourselves. Hi. My name is Simran. I use pronouns like she, her, and hers. I'm currently a third-year student at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities studying neuroscience, and I am super passionate about mental health in the Desi American community, and I'm also really passionate about queer issues and queer health in the Desi American community. In my free time, I like writing poetry, I like eating ice cream, and I like talking to people, so I'm super excited to be on this podcast.
Hi, my name is Kirat. I'm a sophomore at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and I'm studying psychology. I've always been super passionate about advocating for mental health, and this summer I had the opportunity to work as a youth advocate for SEWA-AIFW, which is a culturally specific nonprofit based out of the Twin Cities. And I'm really excited to get started on this podcast journey, so we have a chance to talk about things that were never normalized growing up.
And my name is Pallavi. I use pronouns like she, her, hers. I graduated from the University of Minnesota back in May. I studied business and psychology, but I'm really excited for this podcast because just like Simran and Kirat, I've been really passionate about mental health. It's been a topic of personal importance too, and something I think that our Desi communities need to talk about more. But on the side, I also have my own podcast. So doing this podcast through SEWA allows me to combine both those passions and talk to you all about these important topics.
So here we are, just 3 passionate women in the world, talking about something that's very important to us. So thank you again for listening. Now, since this is episode 1 of Life Without Limca, we are joined by Mango Kulfi.
Let's go!
Yeah! So we'll be enjoying Mango Kulfi on today's episode, and we encourage you to join us in that endeavor. And also because this is our first podcast, we want to give you a little bit more information about what our objectives are as part of this podcast, and a little bit more information about what we're going to be talking about. Kirat, would you like to talk to that?
So basically, this podcast is going to cover a huge variety of topics, but most of them will revolve around mental health and building healthy relationships. In my experience, sometimes South Asian culture has a habit of pushing things under the rug, so I think it's time that we change the foundation to open communication and start fostering better relationships for our generation, the older generation, every generation to come. Today specifically, we're going to be talking a little bit about our struggles with biculturalism, specifically how it can impact social expectations, family and home expectations, and how the result of that kind of impacts your expectations from yourself and can sometimes leave you a little hanging in the middle. So we're all going to take a little bit to talk about our individual backgrounds, and we do come from different home situations, different perspectives, so if you're able to resonate with even a sliver of our experiences, that you feel not alone. Simran, if you want to start us off with a little bit of your background, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, I guess my story really begins with my grandparents, who were refugees during the Indo-Pakistani War. And so they were kids during that time, and so their families just left everything in Pakistan, came to India, and started from the bottom. Now we're here. They really built a life for themselves, and I really, respect the hell out of them for that. Just from stories that my mother has told me, my grandfather was a very, very simple man. He tailored his own clothes. He wore the same white shirt and white pants every single day, and when he retired and whenever he was bored, he literally spent all day just riding city buses. It's great. That's the kind of people watching I want to get to one day. But my parents grew up in India and immigrated to the United States in the late 90s. And my mom came here first. She found a job, and she came here before my dad. So a real feminist, a real pioneer. She really made it work for her. And then obviously the best day of my parents' lives was when I was born in 2000. Obviously. And since the day that I was born, and up to today, my dad calls me Dr. Simran because he's always had a dream for me to be a doctor and to be a professional in medicine. And, that's been my parents' American dream for me, to be able to pursue something that I really love doing. Hopefully that thing is biology. And make a living out of it. I spent a lot of my early years up till the end of high school really trying to fulfill that dream for them. So I spent a lot of time studying in high school, and that also means my mom spent a lot of time cutting up fruits and bringing it to my room. So that is all to say that I lived a pretty sheltered life in high school. Like, I spent Friday nights trying to solve millennial math problems with my friends. I have a varsity calculus t-shirt in my room, and I didn't even like math. So it was really in college that I opened up to the world. I realized more about the world. I learned how to place vocabulary on the systemic injustices that permeated our lives and how to fight against them. There were definitely times in high school where I myself felt those injustices, or I saw peers experience those injustices, and I just didn't know how to stand up to that, or I just didn't know how to talk about that because I just never had that vocabulary to do so. So going to college really made me a stronger person and a stronger advocate. And, I really met some of my best friends who allowed me to learn what it means to be an Asian American and how to together build a stronger POC community. And, through that experience, I learned a lot about myself as well. I began to discover my queer sexuality. I started to talk to my parents beyond what my chores were for that day, and I learned about their immigration stories. And I learned, and I really realized that I want to spend the rest of my life sharing stories about myself and the people around me, because I think that's a really, really powerful thing. And, even through this podcast, if there's a sliver that resonates with someone, I think, it's worth it. And, it was really during college and really trying to figure myself out and when I just started to notice a lot of differences between myself and what I wanted for myself, and then also the expectations that my parents had for me. And that's when, the bicultural identity really became a factor in my health and my relationship with my parents. And like I said before, there were a lot of expectations that were put on both my brother and myself. And, that's when I really began to pay attention to our mental health. And I began to unpack some of my upbringing experiences and my past family experiences, and really found out that my parents and my family they're very stoic. There's a lot of toxic patriarchy, and it's very hard to talk about things like mental health, especially when, your parents don't always hear you out, or are often, very easy to suggest that, it's not your mental health, it's your physical health. You need to eat better. You need to, engage in Ayurveda. So it was very difficult to kind of navigate this discourse of mental health when, your family is so quick to invalidate some of your experiences. And so it really wasn't until my brother started to show signs and symptoms of severe anxiety and depression that we really began to talk about it. So it's this pent up, just bottled experiences like this that make me want to be a better advocate for mental health. And to really unpack some of the cultural factors that go into building this stigma and building this barrier that prevents receiving adequate care at the right time.
Thank you, Simran. And I know a lot of your story, even though we've had such a different experience, resonated with me. My grandparents were also, refugees after that war. But I grew up in India. I grew up in a joint family. It was a very sheltered situation because even though it was a joint family, you would expect there'd be a lot of other kids my age with me. But as it turned out, my brother and all my other cousins who stayed with me were 10 years or older than me.
Oh, wow.
So by the point I was growing up, they were all gone for college or for jobs or things like that. So what happened was that I was the only kid in a house of 8 adults, which automatically means that they are going to be overprotective of you, they're going to shelter you, but then they're also going to question and monitor every move you're making. So I would go to meet my friends, and my grandma, who was on the ground floor, would be like, "Where are you going? Didn't you just meet your friends yesterday?" And a lot of those things kind of build up over the years, and then just led me to becoming more socially anxious, more like lacking confidence, because when in a home environment you don't feel comfortable with those things, how would you feel comfortable like in school or in public situations? And so that just kept up building year over year over year. And my high school years, like I would go to school, I would come back home and then not really go anywhere a lot. But then when I was in 11th grade, I ended up switching schools because of the same reason. I was like, okay, things are becoming really toxic. I need a new environment. Let's do that. And that's when I started realizing what was going on. And it wasn't something that anybody was doing consciously. It was just happening because of the situation. And so when eventually I came to the US for college, which was in 2016, so 4 years ago, was my first breath of like independence and actually seeing the world and breaking out of that shell, which came with its challenges, it came with its wins. And I definitely think I am a different person than I was 4 years ago. But what has happened now is that there's a lot going on in the world, and talking about those things to my parents right now is very difficult because they are in India. They are living a very different life and experience from what I'm living here. Like, each country is having its own social justice movement, for example, but it's very different to explain to my parents, for instance, like Black Lives Matter or the protests and why that's happening, when they are seeing something very different there. They're seeing something very different on the TV, and like Indian media is not giving them that full picture that we're seeing here. And so because of that, I have this frustration and confusion in our conversations where it's like, okay, I'm trying to, tell them my point of view, and they're trying to retaliate back with what they've seen in like the 60 years that they've been alive. And so it's a lot of going back and forth, which is confusing because they don't have that chance to like be here and see what it's really like. And so biculturalism for me is a situation where I'm in it, but 99% of my family isn't. And so how do I have those conversations? And so it's something I'm still struggling with. And another factor that kind of plays into my struggle of that is that I am here on a visa. I'm a non-immigrant, and so being in the US, I'm labeled as a non-resident alien, which is very alienating in its like term itself. And people in India, like if you go on like a news websites like comments or like Facebook page and its comments, like they call people like me abandoners, like, oh, you're abandoning your country. And so it's like biculturalism is something I'm struggling with because both the cultures are unaccepting of who I am as a person and as an identity too. And so I think all that to say that while I definitely have grown out of that shell and like come out in these past 4 years, it's still a constant battle of like, okay, who am I? Like, how do I have these conversations with people who mean so much to me without like letting go of my mental health? Because these things do take a toll on you, and I know that's what this podcast and this episode is for. But I think everybody who is in a situation like ours or somewhat even remotely similar needs like a pat on their back, because it is a lot to handle.
Thank you so much for sharing, Pallavi. I have family members that have shared similar experiences with me, and I know it can be really challenging to grow up and to continue to live in a situation where you feel like you don't really belong to either side. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
Like I said earlier, my name is Kirat. I don't think I said my pronouns. I go by pronouns she, her, and hers. And I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So basically, I was predominantly raised by my mom and my nanny. And my mom actually grew up in the States. So I think that kind of changed her approach on parenting. Because she had that insight of, coming to like a foreign country, foreign environment, kind of just being shoved into a school setting where I feel like now more so at least like POCs and like different cultures are more so embraced than they were like in the 90s. So, which is like the time frame that she came here. So it was just, she has that insight of how hard it can be to fit in. So I think when I was growing up, she was super relaxed about her expectations. And my mom also had me when she was really young. So we were both kind of figuring out our life as we grew up. And when it came to expectations, she was like, you know, like, be friends with whoever. Like, there's no race or like a specific type of people that you need to be friends with, because that's an expectation that she grew up with. Like, my grandparents were always like, oh, you're in this school, like, be friends with only Desi people because that'll help you retain the culture. And that was something that she struggled with so much, because the Desi community that she was around at the time could be, like, showed her toxicity, whereas people from other cultures were so much more accepting. So that's never something that she enforced on me, which I'm so grateful for, because I think I've made friends with people from so many different cultures, and I've gotten to embrace the beauty of diversity, which I think a lot of people don't even have the opportunity to get because of expectations that they have. Kind of similarly, she was never like super, super strict on like, you have to get straight A's or you have to like perform exceedingly well in school. I think to her it was more important that I was like well-rounded, like, and just like also like, she's super social, so like she wanted me to have social skills and like kind of encouraged me to be my own person. And me and my mom are even really close now, but that being said, I went through very similar struggles of addressing mental health with her. I think we talk about mental health so much in like school settings, and you know, we do 8th grade health and 6th grade health, and like we talk about it so objectively, but then when you're not hearing about it in family environments, even though I have such an open relationship with my family, even though we talk about everything, when I was struggling in high school, I felt like my family couldn't see that, or they were like, oh, it's just like situational, it's gonna pass, like it's not going to, it's nothing that needs to be addressed. And then like it took a call from like my school social worker to my mom to be like, you know, like she needs to talk to someone. Like this is not just like growing pains of puberty, and like it's not something that's just gonna go away. Like she needs to talk to someone. And I remember like having conversation with my mom about like, she was like, I'm so sorry, like I didn't realize it was that deep, is basically what she said. Which I think a lot of times, like even us as like on the other side of it, we can struggle to have those conversations with our parents and with our family and loved ones. But that's definitely a personal objective of mine, is to kind of figure out ways that we, including the audience, y'all, and us in the room, we can all have more open conversations with our loved ones about these things that are so, so important to the overall well-being of everybody.
Yeah.
Like I was mentioning earlier, I was never like really pushed to be super involved in the Desi community. So like growing up, I went to like Gurdwara, but then as I grew up, it kind of like dwindled away. So my connection to the Desi community was few and far between. And like my mom has Desi friends, but it was never like, I was never around people that were my age or like peers of mine, I guess. So in high school, I kind of took it upon myself to be like more involved in the Desi community and make more Desi friends. And I think that helped me understand a lot of my own struggles with biculturalism and like some insecurities I had with like being different, you know, like I think people don't even realize, but there's so many things that are just like made for like a majority, like I always went to majority white schools before I went to the high school that I graduated from. And so like I never even realized that like there was beauty in difference and there was beauty in diversity. And I'm so glad I got the chance to like get involved with these organizations in high school, because I think it, like, yes, biculturalism comes with so many struggles, but there's also so much so much we have to grow from it, and I'm really excited to kind of unpack some of that stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Kirat.
yeah.
So now that you've heard a little bit about each of us and know the lens that we are coming from, we hope that you will join us on this journey of self-discovery, self-growth, and activation for change in our community. So over the course of this podcast, we'll be talking about a lot of topics, some of which we did refer to in this episode and some that we didn't. But things such as dating, parent-child relationships, and more about our personal stories is something we will be bringing up, in addition to hopefully having experts in the field such as psychologists, or having some parents, some other college-going students on the episode to share their perspective as well. So join us, tell us what you're liking, and we are excited to carry on this podcast and this journey.
Thank you so much for listening.
Go buy some mango kulfi.
Stay healthy, wear a mask.
And we look forward to chatting with you guys soon.
The universe took its time on you, crafted you to offer the world something different from everyone else. When you doubt how you were created, you doubt an energy greater than us both. Rupi Gaur.